everyone, welcome to Sintra or Bust, our Best of Portugal tour. Now, over the past 5 weeks, we've covered about 4,000 miles across northern Spain and Portugal. We've been on every type of road from motorway to mud tracks, and we've ridden in everything from biblical rain to 40-degree blinding heat.
Welcome to Sintra or Bust, our grand tour of Spain and Portugal, now 9 days in. Mike and I have been joined by our wives Pauline and Mandy. Together with Steve, we were looking forward to spending a few days of R&R in the wonderful city of Porto. First though, we had to attend to a serious mechanical problem with Mike's bike. The issue was so serious that it could only be rectified by a visit to the official Triumph dealer in Porto, who we hoped would have the fully authorised 3-in-1 oil, which is necessary to carry out this critical repair.
Interesting, I like to have a go.
Of course, it could have been just an excuse for Mike to look at bigger bikes. In the event, the Triumph dealer was spectacularly useless and totally disinterested in helping out. So much for supporting Triumph riders overseas. While Mike was being fobbed off by the dealership, I took a look at the shop next door, a general hardware store which was dimly lit but seemed to stock the sort of things that might help us. In the event, we found not 3-in-1, but 7-in-1, and that's 4 better than we were looking for. A swift application test showed we'd made the right choice. Mike was happy, and now we could concentrate on being tourists for a few days. It was time to take this tourism stuff seriously, and that meant selecting what we should go and see. Luckily, there are plenty of pre-packaged self-guided tours to choose from. With a bit of walking to do, our team preparations led to a bit of dodgy dealing in full daylight. Check out Mike's guilty look, although to be fair, the substance in question is just ibuprofen.
Yeah.
I guess old age, bike tours and painkillers go hand in hand. There are of course other ways to get painkillers when you're on tour, and we had got a bunch of miles to go. Porto is awash with historic buildings from top to bottom, and many feature those lovely decorative tiles that are typical of this region of Portugal. We found our way down to the riverfront and were treated to a lively street scene.
And I think of all the things I want you doing in my head, and I paint a picture.
What a great place to chill out, relax and people watch. Time then to take a break, a bite of lunch and maybe a touristy photo or two. Or 3. The aforementioned street scene was so lively in fact that dancing was mandatory. Check out our Steve here, cutting some funky shapes. Note to self, keep Steve away from the sangria. Tourism is obviously big business in Porto. This guy, for instance, makes his living by charging €1 for just 2 hammer taps. The first of our planned tourist visits was to the São Francisco Church and Catacombs, taking in a tram engine changing lines along the way. Trams have largely disappeared from use across most of Europe, and it was nice to have the opportunity to see one in action. The visit to the catacombs was both intriguing and educational, and raised an open question about the treatment of the deceased, especially when you consider the reverential treatment we give to ordinary folks when they're buried nowadays. The catacombs were originally intended for members of the Franciscan Brotherhood. However, in practice, wealthy noblemen, merchants and their families were given a special place of honour in the Catacombs. Monks and the less affluent were dealt rather less specially, namely to be dumped underground en masse. Worse, after a period of time deemed to be respectful, the bodies under the floor were removed to make way for the next set of paying customers. What happened to them after that is anyone's guess. I guess that's what the phrase means, when your number's up. In contrast to the catacombs, the church itself is a decidedly golden, grandiose affair. Photography isn't allowed, so of course we can't show you anything of the inside. Taking a tram to the south side of the river, we headed for the Half Rabbit, choosing a ski-style lift as the easiest way to get down to river level. The Rabbit is a particularly outstanding landmark that the tour office had told us to look out for. The views from the Ponte Bridge are truly spectacular, so we hung around a bit to check out the views and take in the atmosphere of the town. I'm sure the locals are used to it, but that tram appears awfully close when you're walking next to it. The journey in the ski-style cable cars gave us a great opportunity to take in the south side of the river before we arrived.
Yeah.
The south side is home to numerous river cruise companies and also some very famous port houses. When we finally found the Half Rabbit, well, it wasn't what we'd expected, but remarkable nonetheless. It's made out of recycled rubbish, and in this case, mostly motorcycle fairings, wheels, and other parts. We had booked a tour around the small and independent Bondia company after lunch, but first we were off on a river cruise, headed upriver to explore the numerous bridges that cross the River Douro in the city. The day was overcast but warm, and I was looking forward to learning about the bridges as part of our cruise. However, buyer beware, there was nothing specific mentioned in the tour blurb about a commentary, and indeed there was none. The river trip, therefore, was nothing more than being blown about quite a bit for about half an hour on the water. We saw plenty of bridges, but we learned nothing about them. All in all, it was a bit meh. I was, however, intrigued by one bridge in particular. The iron construction just ahead is the delightfully named Maria Pia Bridge, built in 1877 by Gustave Eiffel. That's about 20 years before he took his talents to Paris to construct some tower or other. The return leg was a little less windy and the boat made good progress, and so we arrived back at the quayside a bit earlier than expected. So it was off for a quick pit stop for lunch while we waited for the Quinta do Bom Dia to open. Mandy found a new friend and I decided to join them for a sit down, as I was a little stiff. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. The tour around Bom Dia by experienced guide Rui Santos was captivating. We learned a huge amount in a very short time about different types of port and the aging processes, not to mention the official system of classification and grading.
10 by 10 until the maximum 20, 30, and the maximum is the 40 years old. We have to try in 10 minutes in a tasting room, 10 years old wine. Fine ruby, 20 red, and 30 red. If you remember, I said when the red have 6 or 7 years old, The name of the level is town. Only the word town in the bottom means at 6, 7 years old start to stay more light there. Portuguese name is amber.
At the end of the tour, we were treated to a free tasting session. As we were in the mood to explore, we extended the session to try a couple of the more unusual offerings, including a 40-year-old port that was actually bottled in 1943. That was a really special experience, not cheap, but memorable. And I left with a new appreciation of how independent porthouses were coping faced with competition from multinational companies.
This is a very special stay today. We really enjoyed it.
The other wines make legs in a glass. This wine makes church windows around. Very strong and persistent. This is why, after try it in my house at night, if I leave the glass in the kitchen in a table and I close the door, the next morning when I open the door, the flavor comes slowly. Nothing compared with this. Amazing.
We decided to walk across the Ponte Luís Bridge rather than take the tram on the way back. This wasn't a popular move with my wife Pauline. She's afraid of heights, but she did really well until she spotted a minute air gap in the pavement. She struggled with the crossing, and I knew I was in trouble. I guess things weren't really helped by our mates taking the mickey in support. We finished the evening with a lovely meal, although I got to relive the horrors of the Monaco sweet drink that Mike and I had suffered in Nîmes on our Big 'Un tour in 2023. Well, it's a new day and a fresh challenge. Mike had decided to spend the day with his beloved bike, and of course Mandy. Mike had told me that he was going to give her a thorough going over. The bike, that is, to make sure she was clean for the rest of the tour. This left Pauline, Steve and myself taking an excursion to Aveiro, the Venice of Portugal. Aveiro was a complete delight from the outset. Fabulous tile-covered houses, waterways and even a superbly decorated mall to tell us that this would be a fun place to spend the day. We took some time to check out the numerous and very pretty bridges that were covered in ribbons, presumably left by previous tourists. True to the promise of a Portuguese Venice, there were many Venetian-style boats plying the waterways, full of tourists of course. Well, when in Rome, or even a pretend Venice, I guess it's time to jump aboard a boat. As luck would have it, we picked a boat owned by Dora and her husband. Dora was engaging from the outset, and definitely an extrovert.
What? Se é para não sair o pulmão pela boca.
She entertained everyone with a mixture of information and song and dance, in more languages than I could count. And she wound everyone up to get them in the mood as we approached the Kissing Bridge. Given that my missus was sitting next to Steve at the time, it did cause everyone a moment or two of confusion. Still, what goes on tour stays on tour. Unless it's on YouTube, of course. As the boat ride came to an end, Dora took time to take some photos of each of the groups and couples. I'm not quite sure what Steve whispered to Pauline in this shot, but it certainly got a reaction. With the help of Google Maps, we headed towards the coast, past a number of pastel-coloured holiday homes that are a feature of the town. found a little alley between the houses and headed towards the beach. When we got there, we found a massive and largely empty beach, which of course faces west onto the Atlantic. It was pretty windy but very warm, so we took our shoes and socks off and did the British thing, namely having a paddle. The walking over with, we celebrated with a couple of drinks, found an Uber to take us back to the railway station, and headed back to Porto. Looking back, I think I enjoyed our trip to Aveiro as much or even more than I did the time spent in Porto itself. Our few days in town had come to an end, so we had a last team meal before setting off again on our bikes, leaving the girls to take a taxi to the airport. To be honest, I found parting from Pauline in Porto harder than I did when I was at home in the Isle of Man, and not just because it's difficult to say. All of a sudden, there seemed to be an awful lot of tour left to cover, and I was missing home already. In the past 2 weeks, we made it as far as Porto. That's the red line. And as you can see from the green line, we've got a lot of miles to cover, and that's going to take us another 3 weeks. That's a whole bunch of hotel stays, a lot of miles, and many nights of Mike snoring. But there's lots to look forward to. Great sights, great roads, and challenges on and off the bike, including some very hot weather when we get down south. Join us next time for a tale of intrigue and suspense in the Portuguese countryside. I look forward to seeing you on the road.